This is also a time of change for my family.
The room fell silent before Prince William even finished speaking. Queen Camilla had arrived expecting approval for a role beside the crown, but the Prince of Wales carried a decision that changed everything. With one signature, William blocked her from controlling the monarchy's ceremonial jewels, historic regalia, and coronation planning. King Charles stared at the document in disbelief. Camilla demanded an explanation. William gave her one sentence, and it silenced the entire palace. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had entered the emergency meeting certain the matter was settled. Camilla sat beside him with prepared notes, while William placed a sealed directive on the table. The Crown Council, a private body advising on royal decisions, had gathered to approve her authority over the royal collection, the historic objects held for the nation and monarchy. William did not soften the blow. He invoked the Heirs Preservation Order, a safeguard giving the next sovereign control over objects and plans tied to the future reign. In one move, the prince transferred authority over regalia, succession jewels, and sovereign planning away from Camilla's office and into his supervision. Camilla leaned forward, anger breaking through her composure. She accused him of humiliating her before the council and demanded that he withdraw the order. William placed his hand on the signed page. The crown cannot be arranged around personal ambition. Charles read the opening paragraph twice. His fingers tightened around the paper as he asked whether his son had brought a warning or declared war on the throne. William met his father's stare and said it was protection, not punishment. Yet the king understood the wound. Reversing the directive would mean formally challenging the position of his heir. William then revealed how the decision had been built. Through documented palace requests reviewed over weeks, he had traced attempts by Camilla's office to control jewels connected to Queen Elizabeth II, Princess Diana, and Catherine's future coronation. The discovery turned a disagreement into a battle over inheritance, memory, and the next reign. Camilla rose without speaking. She left her notes behind and walked out as the door closed. Charles remained seated, shaken by what his son had done and what he had failed to stop. Then he noticed a handwritten reference attached to the final page, the name of a private ceremony held 3 months earlier, one never meant to reach William. The signature had silenced Camilla, but the hidden ceremony would explain why William was willing to wound his father so deeply, and why the people behind the crown could no longer avoid choosing sides. This was never simply a dispute over jewels, ceremonies, or palace protocol. For Prince William, the crown represented a duty he had been trained to inherit since childhood. For Camilla, it represented acceptance after decades of judgment. For King Charles, it represented the fragile union between the woman he loved and the son who would replace him. Inside Windsor, those three meanings collided. No one could protect everything, and the monarch was beginning to realize that any choice would cost him someone he loved. William had never viewed the monarchy as a possession. From childhood, he had been taught that the crown was something temporarily carried for the country, then passed forward untouched by personal desire. The Prince of Wales, the title given to the direct heir to the throne, understood that every private decision could one day become a public burden. His mother's suffering had only deepened that belief. Camilla carried a different wound. She had spent years moving from rejection to acceptance, from scandal to the position of queen. That rise had brought dignity, but it had never erased the fear that her place could still be challenged. Her interest in ceremonial authority was not only about jewels. It was about making her role impossible to question again. Catherine watched William prepare for the council meeting and heard the tension in every word. She asked whether he was ready to be called disloyal to his father. He answered that silence would be the greater betrayal. The princess knew one of Camilla's requests involved an heirloom linked to Diana, yet she warned him not to let grief control the decision. Still, she never asked him to withdraw it. Charles tried to calm the damage in private. He told Camilla that he would defend her dignity and protect her position beside him. Then she asked whether he would overturn William's order. The king paused. It lasted only seconds, but she heard fear where she had expected certainty. Later, Charles sat alone with the signed directive. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the page, and read William's words about personal ambition again. Anger should have come first. Instead, exhaustion settled over him. He knew his son had not acted blindly. William held internal memoranda showing repeated requests from Camilla's office for wider control over the lending, presentation, and ceremonial use of royal heirlooms. One documented request reached beyond the current reign and into Catherine's future. Another touched Diana's memory directly. The conflict had not truly begun in the council chamber. It had started earlier, during a private ceremony. When Camilla made one demand William could not forgive. The palace could hide behind constitutional language, but the truth waited inside a closed room, a velvet case, and the boundary she had crossed without knowing he would one day strike back. 3 months before William signed the order, a private royal rehearsal took place behind locked doors. It was meant to be routine, a small ceremony testing arrangements for future state occasions. No cameras, no public announcement, only Charles, Camilla, several senior aides, and the custodians of the royal collection. But when one velvet case was opened, Camilla made a request that stunned the room. By the time William learned what had happened, the dispute was no longer about protocol. It had become deeply personal. Charles entered the rehearsal, expecting a quiet review, not a confrontation. The event was called the St. Edward's Continuity Rehearsal, a private exercise designed to test ceremonial roles if the king became unable to complete major duties. William had not been invited because Camilla's office described it as a technical matter for the current reign, not the future succession. Camilla stood beside the open case and made the request plainly. She wanted Diana's sapphire and pearl heirloom included in a proposed Queen's Continuity ensemble, a planned set of jewels reserved for her use during emergency state occasions. The Queen argued that the piece should be absorbed into the active crown collection rather than remain protected by memory. Charles reacted at once. He asked whether another jewel could be chosen and warned that the request would cause pain if it reached William. Camilla refused to retreat. She said treating Diana's possessions as untouchable gave the past more authority than the living queen. The king said nothing after that, and his silence changed the mood in the room. One senior custodian then refused to remove the heirloom without written approval from William. A custodian is an official responsible for protecting and controlling royal objects. Camilla closed the velvet lid herself and ordered her private office to reconsider the request through formal channels. She left the room angry, while Charles remained behind, knowing the matter had not ended. Days later, William received a confidential copy of the rehearsal record through a documented internal briefing. He stopped reading when he reached the description of the jewel. Catherine watched him move away and remained silent, not because he lacked words, but because the insult had reached something older than anger. The record revealed more. Camilla's request formed part of a wider proposal, giving her influence over heirlooms, intended for Catherine and Princess Charlotte. William also discovered that Charles had never approved the full plan, yet he had failed to stop it when the chance was there. That failure cut deepest. Camilla had made the demand, but his father's silence had allowed it to survive. William began preparing the heirs' preservation order in secret. Soon, he would place the record before both of them and force the truth into the open. The hidden rehearsal supplied the reason, but the breaking point would come when Camilla had to answer without advisors, excuses, or escape. The second meeting was smaller, colder, and far more dangerous. There were no council members to maintain order, and no courtiers to soften the language. William stood opposite Camilla, with the rehearsal record between them. Charles remained at the end of the table, caught between his wife and his heir. Then the prince opened the file to the page naming Diana's heirloom. The queen did not deny the request. Instead, she defended it. And the restraint he had carried into the room finally broke. Charles had ordered the private meeting at Windsor to stop the dispute from spreading through the household. Only the king, Camilla, William, and Catherine were present. The setting mattered because no advisor could absorb the anger, and no official statement could hide what was now a family wound. Camilla spoke first. She accused William of using the heirs preservation order to reduce her from queen to temporary companion. The order was a formal safeguard, protecting regalia and plans tied to the next reign. She called it an insult disguised as duty. William slid the rehearsal record across the table. He pointed to the request involving Diana's sapphire and pearl heirloom and asked why his mother's possessions had been discussed without him. His voice remained controlled, but the question landed harder than a shout. Camilla answered that the monarchy could not remain trapped by grief. She said the crown had to serve the living, not be ruled by memories of the dead. William pushed his chair back. "Remembrance is not weakness," he said, "and inheritance is not permission to erase someone." Charles ordered his son to lower his voice. The prince turned toward him and asked why he had not stopped the request when it was first made. The king tried to explain that the rehearsal had moved too quickly and that he believed the matter would be reconsidered. William heard delay, not innocence. She saw how close he was to walking out and knew that leaving would turn anger into rupture. He looked at her, steadied himself, and returned to his seat. Camilla then revealed through her documented account of the rehearsal that Charles had encouraged her to prepare for a stronger ceremonial role if his health limited future appearances. The Queen used that private conversation as proof that her request had not appeared from nowhere. Charles admitted the discussion had happened. He had spoken about continuity, meaning how royal duties would continue if he became unable to perform them. But he insisted he never approved the use of Diana's heirloom. The distinction protected his authority. It did nothing to repair his bond with William. William closed the file and declared that the preservation order would remain in force. Camilla held his gaze and answered that no prince could overrule a crowned sovereign forever. The wound was now exposed. The next battle would not be fought through grief, but through precedent, authority, and the hidden limits of a king's power. Charles was still king. His signature opened parliament, appointed ministers, and gave royal authority its legal voice. Yet the document before him revealed a harder truth. Kingship did not mean unlimited control over the future crown. William's move had been built around a constitutional safeguard, created to stop one reign from binding the next. To reverse it, Charles would have to challenge his own heir publicly. He could defeat his son, but only by exposing a family war the palace could never contain. Charles studied the heirs preservation order, while senior advisors explained its weight. The order rested on an old royal convention, a long-accepted rule protecting regalia, trusts, and ceremonial objects reserved for future sovereigns and their immediate heirs. Because William served as both Prince of Wales and designated future custodian, the king could not simply tear up the directive. He would need a formal constitutional review involving senior legal and palace officials. Camilla demanded that he begin that review. She told Charles that allowing the order to stand would teach the household that the queen could be humiliated without consequence. Her anger was no longer only about lost authority. She feared that every servant, advisor, and royal relative would now see weakness where she had fought for years to build respect. Charles understood the danger on both sides. If he overturned William's decision, the public could believe he had placed his wife's ceremonial ambitions above the stability of the succession. If he did nothing, Camilla would know he had chosen caution over her dignity. His power remained immense, yet every path led toward humiliation. Princess Anne entered after the advisors left and spoke to her brother through a private recorded consultation prepared for the royal archive. She warned him that William's legal position was stronger than Camilla realized. A review would not remain limited to one heirloom. It could expose every disputed request made by the Queen's office. Anne had already examined an internal inventory. The document showed proposed changes involving pieces linked to Catherine, Princess Charlotte, and the late Queen. She told Charles that forcing the issue into open review could turn a private wound into a full examination of Camilla's intentions. Charles asked whether she was standing with William. Anne held his gaze and answered, "I am standing with the crown." The distinction struck him harder than open rejection. His own sister was not choosing the son over the father. She was choosing the institution over both. Silence followed. Charles lifted the unsigned challenge notice, reached for his pen, and held it above the page. One mark could begin the fight. Instead, he set the pen down. That hesitation changed everything. Instructions linked to William's order had already begun moving through the royal household. By morning, Camilla would discover that the prince's authority was no longer theoretical, and the first closed door would make the new reality impossible to ignore. By the next morning, the order was no longer a threat written on paper. It had become a series of closed doors. Camilla's staff lost access to the secure royal collection schedule. A planned jewelry review vanished from her calendar. Instructions carrying William's authority reached Windsor, Buckingham Palace, and the Tower. Nothing was announced publicly, yet everyone inside the household understood what had happened. The Queen had not lost her title, but a vital part of her influence had been removed overnight. Camilla entered the day expecting resistance, not isolation. William's directive had separated her ceremonial office from the custodians responsible for succession regalia and heirlooms reserved for future royal generations. A custodian is an official trusted to protect and control historic royal objects. Palace staff were now told that any request involving those pieces required written approval from William or Catherine before it could even reach Charles. The first humiliation came quietly. Camilla arrived for a scheduled jewelry review and found the display room closed. An apologetic official explained that the appointment had been cancelled under the new preservation protocol, the set of rules enforcing the prince's order. She asked who had authorized the change. The answer came softly, but it landed with force. The future king. Camilla returned to her private sitting room furious. She removed her gloves, dropped them onto a chair, and asked her private secretary whether Charles had called. When the answer was no, her anger began to collapse into something colder. She dismissed everyone and sat alone, realizing the king had still not challenged the decision. Several members of her staff then began protecting themselves. Through written statements prepared for the internal audit, they claimed the disputed requests had been interpreted more aggressively than intended. The Queen understood what that meant. The people who had once carried out her instructions were now creating distance from them. William moved faster. He ordered a complete audit, a formal review of every pending ceremonial change connected to the current and future reigns. The review uncovered a draft plan placing Camilla at the center of Catherine's future coronation preparations. It would have given her influence over jewels, ceremonial roles, and the public presentation of the next queen. Charles finally visited that evening. Camilla asked whether he still believed she belonged beside the crown. The king answered yes without hesitation. Then she asked whether he would restore what William had taken. This time, he could not promise it. That answer ended the illusion. Camilla saw that Charles would defend her dignity, but he would not risk the monarchy to recover her power. Humiliation had stripped away her certainty, yet it had also removed every advisor and institution standing between her and William. For the first time, the Queen decided to face the future king alone, and speak without the king between them. There were no aides in the room, no files on the table, and no king waiting to intervene. Camilla had requested 10 private minutes with William, and he had agreed on one condition: they would speak as members of a family, not as rival royal offices. For the first time since the crisis began, neither of them could hide behind protocol. Camilla entered ready to defend her position. Instead, she began with a confession that changed the meaning of the entire struggle. Camilla had chosen a small private library at Clarence House, a royal residence used by members of the family rather than a formal state office. The setting mattered because it removed the weight of ceremony. No official could record the exchange, no advisor could interrupt, and no prepared statement could protect either of them from the truth. William had agreed only after speaking with Catherine. She reminded him that protecting the future crown did not require humiliating another person forever. The princess knew his anger was justified, but she also understood that victory without mercy could harden into something darker. Camilla spoke first. She admitted that her demand for wider ceremonial control had grown from fear. After years of public judgment, she still believed one mistake could reduce her to an outsider again. Becoming queen had given her status, but not peace. She had tried to secure her place by controlling symbols no one could question. William listened, then answered without softness. He told her legitimacy could not be built by absorbing Diana's memory, Catherine's future role, or Princess Charlotte's inheritance into her own position. The crown, he said, was not a shield for insecurity. Camilla insisted she had never intended to wound him personally. The prince replied that intention could not erase impact. Her request had reopened an old loss, challenged his wife's future, and reached toward his daughter's inheritance. Those consequences were real, even if cruelty had not been the purpose. Camilla then placed a handwritten withdrawal statement on the table. The document formally abandoned every disputed claim involving Diana's heirloom and future coronation regalia. Coronation regalia means the jewels, robes, and ceremonial objects used when a sovereign is crowned. Her signature ended the direct challenge. William revealed through the private conversation that he was prepared to preserve her existing privileges, provided they remained tied to Charles's reign and could not bind the next one. Camilla accepted the boundary. She did not apologize for becoming queen. She apologized for treating memory and succession as threats to her security. William left with the statement. Camilla remained behind, quieter than when she entered. Their battle had ended, but the deepest fracture still waited elsewhere. The queen and the heir had finally spoken honestly. Now Charles would have to face the son his silence had wounded, and decide whether the monarchy emerged united or merely controlled. The palace had hoped to contain the crisis through silence. Instead, the silence became the story. By sunrise, one newspaper had transformed William's private order into a national declaration of royal power. Broadcasters debated whether the prince had protected the crown or weakened the king. Crowds gathered outside Windsor, some praising the heir and others accusing him of cruelty. Inside the castle, Charles watched his family's private pain become public judgment and understood that hesitation had allowed the world to write its own version. The palace issued a controlled statement claiming that the management of future coronation regalia had been clarified by mutual agreement. Coronation regalia means the jewels, robes, and sacred objects used when a sovereign is crowned. The careful wording was meant to suggest calm. Instead, it confirmed that something serious had happened behind closed doors. Royal commentators quickly framed the crisis as a struggle between the current reign and the next. The question was no longer only whether Camilla had overreached. It was whether William had crossed a line by acting before he became king, and whether Charles had lost control by refusing to challenge him. The London Chronicle captured the mood with a brutal front page. A full-width image of William appeared beneath the headline, "The heir takes control." Beside it, a smaller photograph showed Charles leaving Windsor with his head lowered. One page turned a private family wound into a public verdict. Crowds gathered near the King Henry V gate at Windsor Castle. Some applauded William for defending Diana's legacy. Others held signs demanding respect for the reigning monarch. The argument outside mirrored the division inside: protection to one side, betrayal to the other. Charles watched a television presenter describe him as a father overtaken by his son. The king switched off the screen before the discussion ended. He had faced criticism before, but this struck differently. The country was no longer debating only his reign. It was measuring how much of it remained. Camilla saw the same headline and refused to ask the palace to defend her. Her handwritten withdrawal from the disputed claims remained private, leaving William to receive both praise and blame. She understood that revealing her apology would protect the prince while deepening her humiliation. William instructed his office through a recorded internal briefing not to leak the statement or use Camilla's surrender to strengthen his image. Catherine recognized the decision for what it was. He had acted to protect the future crown, not to celebrate a victory over the queen. Charles finally summoned his son. When William entered, the king closed the door himself and ordered the guards not to interrupt them. Outside Windsor, the country argued over who had won. Behind that closed door, a father and son prepared to decide what their crown was worth and what it had already cost them. Charles did not begin as a monarch addressing his heir. He began as a father speaking to his son. The signed order lay between them, but neither man touched it. Charles admitted that William's action had left him feeling challenged, exposed, and suddenly close to the end of his own authority. William admitted that he had feared becoming silent at the exact moment silence would become surrender. What followed was not reconciliation without pain. It was something harder: truth without ceremony. Charles spoke first. He told William that the heirs' preservation order would remain in force. The order was the formal safeguard protecting regalia, heirlooms, and ceremonial plans tied to the next reign. The king would not summon a constitutional review, and he would not attempt to restore the disputed authority Camilla had lost. William accepted the decision without triumph. He agreed that Camilla would keep the full dignity and ceremonial privileges of queen throughout Charles's reign. She would stand beside the monarch, fulfill her public role, and retain the honor attached to her position. But future coronation regalia would remain protected for the next sovereign and Catherine. Charles then admitted what had cost him most. His fear of hurting Camilla had stopped him from drawing a clear boundary when the first request was made. The king had hoped silence would prevent conflict. Instead, it forced his son to act with greater force than should ever have been necessary. William answered carefully. He told his father that the order had never been designed to remove him or weaken his reign. The prince had acted because private loyalty could not be allowed to reshape public inheritance. The crown belonged to no marriage, no grievance, and no single generation. Charles reached for the document at last. He folded it once and placed it inside the official red box, the secure case used to carry the monarch's most important state papers. Then he extended his hand. William hesitated before taking it. The pause revealed the truth. Trust had survived, but it had not escaped without damage. Camilla's handwritten withdrawal was later added to the royal archive through a documented household record. Diana's sapphire and pearl heirloom was permanently designated for the direct line of succession and could not be used during the current reign. The queen accepted the limitation and ended her campaign for wider ceremonial control. Charles remained shaken because the crisis had forced him to face what no father in his position could avoid forever. William was no longer simply waiting to become king. He had already begun protecting the crown according to his own principles. William's move did not overthrow his father or destroy Camilla. It created a boundary between personal acceptance and constitutional inheritance. Charles could reign. The queen could remain beside him, but the future belonged to the heir charged with protecting what came next. The confrontation ended not with exile, revenge, or triumph, but with a line no one inside the monarchy would ever dare to cross again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.